Have you ever played Elden Ring? Maybe you have and you thought to yourself, man, this game is too stinking hard. I wish I could just throw some shit. These bears just absolutely turn my pasta soft, and that's understandable because me too. Maybe you have thrown things in real life, maybe you've even broken things. And to that I say why? Why do that when you can just throw stuff in Elden Ring? That's right, it's consumables time. So let's start off with some much needed but unimpressive introduction stuff. Basically, I'll be using consumables. Now, what are consumables? What classifies as consumables? How are consumables? They're doing great, thanks for asking. Basically, anything that can go in my hotbar will be used. This includes knives, pots, perfumes, spiritual rocks, and crack. Before each boss, I'm going to turn into Super Hyper Tiger Nerd Mafia and talk about boss weaknesses, status effects, and how big their dumpies are, just so you know my strategy and the reasoning behind it. I'll also throw in the materials and where I farmed them just because you asked so nicely. Alright, now that you finish your little nap, you can wake up and start paying attention again. So first up, we need to take a look at what we can obtain early in the game. Theoretically, there's a lot we can get if we take our time to get it, however, I'm too lazy to really care about it, so let's look at Margit's stats instead. He has basically no resistance other than Holy, which is irrelevant, and his dumpy stat is like a 2. Basically, it doesn't really matter what we bring into Margit because he's just as pathetic as always. Due to this, we go into the fight with throwing knives, poison clumps, kukris, and some fan daggers, simply because most of these can be bought from merchants. Throwing knives from Kel the food, kukris from this idiot, fan daggers from my nemesis, poison stones from this loser, and we can craft poison knives using poison bloom in the Crying Pennsylvania and thin beast bones by whooping on this guy and reaching into the void for unlimited of them. We don't level much because, again, it's Margit and he can't comprehend double-digit numbers, so we just get to level 10 just to mess with him a little bit and make him feel less like an intellectual. So let's start the fight now that we know the strategy, and the strategy is that we just poison him and then spam him because he's a pushover. We throw poison knives right off the start because 1, we're trying to poison him before he reaches us for some easy damage, and B, because it makes him have these little green waves coming off of him, indicating to everyone that he stinks like a cartoon, so no one will talk to him.
This guy stinks!
We spam him with kukris after that because we want to bleed him for huge amounts of damage. Essentially, with Margit's health pool and his bleed resistance, we can get 2 full bleeds on him before he perishes, so we keep chucking these things at him until we trigger them both. After getting them both, we could keep hitting him with kukris because of the damage, but I decided to use throwing knives for no reason, just because I felt like it, I guess. So after Margit, we can get a couple of cracked pots, and by a couple, I mean 2. There's definitely more we could get, but again, I'm lazy. Godric's stats are a little higher than Margit's, but not enough to really change the strategy. He has a little more fire resistance, but it won't matter much, and his dumpy is probably like a 3, so not that great. Again, we bring the same stuff, including 2 fire pots, obtained by fusing these butterflies and some shrooms we found on the side of the road. Anyways, we start the fight by trying to poison him with knives until, and I'm not joking, he lags my game. This isn't edited to be slowed down or anything, this is real time how my game was while I was playing on my potato, but we continue on with the poison. Once we do that, we throw a single pot at him because we're devious scoundrels and start the bleed process. We can get 1 full bleed on him during the first phase, and since he spam rolls into every corner he sees, it makes him a pretty easy target. The poison lasts for eternity as well, so he'll continue to take damage while we watch his midlife crisis and decision to obtain an artificial arm. Second phase allows us to get a second bleed on him before he runs out of blood and is unable to donate more to our cause, but that's okay because we got plenty from him and we sell it for huge profits. The poison continues to eat away at his mental health, all the while we throw things at him and get angry with him for violating that dragon for his personal gain. Eventually the poison runs out and it's too late to reapply it, so we just continue throwing knives at him until he tries to figure out how to get his arm working. Not much else to say. He spam rolls into the corner, gets pierced with knives, and eventually loses his rights to that prosthetic arm because he can't afford the medical bills any longer. So Red Wolf is when I decide to stop being lazy and actually go collect a bunch of stuff I'll need for later. This includes grabbing a bunch of cracked pots and a bunch of volcano stones for volcano pots. We also get the jar head from our lover since we're in the mountains in order to become better at throwing pots. Red Wolf's stats are pretty dog shit, so there's not much preparation needed, so we just go right into it after collecting stuff, and his dumpy stat is a complete 0 because he's an animal and I'm not a furry. Now, the fight is pretty annoying since he just jumps around the whole time. Literally just jumps and dodges everything the entire time. And because I'm brain dead, this doesn't stop me and I continue to keep throwing things at him, hoping one of them will eventually hit him, and it doesn't work out until I break his AI. I keep throwing these fire pots at him, and this causes him to play floor as lava by jumping from one spot to the next constantly because the ground is too hot.
I can't fucking compete! I just can't fucking compete!
He does this until I run out of volcano pots, but it's already too late for him because he stood in the lava for a little too long, and just like me at the start of the fight, he repeated the same strategy hoping it would work out, but it doesn't. We don't change our loadout for Renala because it's not needed, since Renala's stats are not that great, but her dumpy stat is a pretty high 7. So we go right into the fight by throwing volcano pots because she forgot how to move during the start of the fight, so she just stands there and gets exploded on. Looking back at it, I probably should have used kukris on her in order to bleed her, but because I don't actually plan for any of these fights unless I lose a bunch, I just ran in here with less items. The fight's pretty simple, just tossing pots until I run out, and then changing into kukris in order to finally begin to bleed her. Eventually, she tells her oath-sworn giant to come, and
Come, oath-sworn giant.
I start to panic for a little until I remember I have this pot on my head, so I'll be fine. I don't poison her because I have no idea why I didn't. I kinda just forgot to, honestly, but ended up working out all the same.
What you say? Oh, that.
As she doesn't have that big of a health bar, the only thing bad about the fight is the fact that her summons keep getting in the way or stopping me from locking onto her, but other than that, it's pretty simple. After Renala, I decided to go get some ritual pots, which I would turn into freeze pots by getting rhymed crystal buds from Caria Manor. Since I'm actually unable to farm these at the moment, I have a limited supply, so I have to make sure to be cautious of how many I use. Now, I choose to use freeze pots because they cause a shit ton of freeze buildup, which will allow most bosses to be froze in about 1 or 2 pots. Obviously, after freezing enemies, they take a large amount of damage, as well as taking more damage in general, as long as they are still frozen. Radon's stats means he'll be able to get frozen after 1 pot, which is great because that's all I got. Other than that, his stats are better than all the previous bosses by a large amount, so we have to be super careful, not to mention his dumpy stat is around a 5. For the start of the fight, we poison him, just to have damage constantly hitting him. We wait for the perfect opportunity to throw our freeze pot because it's my only one, and we get a hit only to follow it up with the dumbest shit I've ever done, throwing a volcano pot right after the freeze. Now, if you don't know why this is dumb, it's because if you hit a target with fire damage while they're frozen, they become unfrozen, which allows you to reapply the debuff again. So me throwing the freeze pot did 1 big burst of damage and then absolutely nothing because my brain turned off. Now that I have freeze pots though, there's something very important I'm able to do, assuming I don't repeat what just happened here. You see, once a target is frozen, they take more damage from everything, about 25%. This also includes bleed damage as well, so if you were to bleed a target that's frozen, they'll take more damage than if they weren't frozen. This means you can get huge bursts of damage almost instantly for basically no work. This little fact will be super helpful for fights that allow for it to happen, assuming I'm able to get them off back to back. But obviously, as you can see, Radon was neglected basically this whole fight because I was talking about other things, but that's okay because he looks way cooler than me, and I don't like it, so we're just gonna ignore him. Godfrey is interesting because he's an asshole, so status effects won't work on him at all. So that means no poison, no bleed, no frost, and no AIDS. None of these will work on him, however, there's one outlier that's present on the fight, and that would be lightning damage. In fact, it's the only one that he hates. This means we need to readjust our loadout a little bit. By a little, I mean we say goodbye to the dogshit volcano pots and instead move on to the cooler lightning pots. These require mushrooms again and vulgar bloom. These grow in a nice area known as Lime Grave, so it's pretty easy to scalp all these from other potential collectors. Now that we've made them, we can continue on to Godfrey, but not before rating his dumpy as a solid 1 because it's incorporeal. Because Godfrey is immune to all status effects and resistant to all damage but lightning, mixed in with the fact that I'm too lazy to potentially get more pots, it's early fast damage until I run out, and then it just turns into absolute slugfest bullet sponge hell, slowly whittling down his health bar. So while this is going on, and there's nothing really to say, let me talk about something important. You may have noticed throughout this video, I haven't been using fan knives or fan daggers, which are arguably some of the strongest thrown items available. This is because when I researched everything, I saw that patches sold an unlimited amount of them. This made me so excited that I closed the wiki page and went off to beat the shit out of him in his cave for his bell bearing. Big mistake for me because patches doesn't sell an unlimited amount until a certain point in the game. So it's not that I haven't been using them, it's that I physically can't and I didn't realize it until it was too late into the run, so yeah, that's cool. But don't worry, I came up with a solution that I'll tell you about a little later, so let's go inside Morgott. If you look at the stats, you can see that Morgott is weak to lightning during second phase and stronger against fire as well. This information didn't exist when I actually did the run, so my dumbass went into the fight with volcano pots and spark aromatics. which also means I had to farm these stupid Miranda Cosgrove flowers to make them. This was miserable, and it ended up being a waste of time because of his damage resistance, but I didn't have this knowledge, so joke's on me, I fucking guess. His dumpy stat is a 2 because he turns into a withered husk after the fight. The fight is basically like the others because we start off with poison in order to have constant damage, because I just like seeing how high I can get the number above his health bar to be, since it makes me feel good. We fly through first phase due to our volcano pots just cooking this guy up, which in turn causes us to start trying to bleed him instead, because once he hits the second phase, he gets strings attached to his back and dances around like a puppet show. Now, you can clearly see I have plenty of knives left since I hardly threw any of them, but I must have been off the lickety-split bean sucker, because why am I using sparks? For what purpose am I doing this? I actually can't believe watching this back how stupid this is. I have no explanation what was going on through my head. All I remember is how much I had to farm for Miranda Cosgrove flowers, and I guess I felt the need to use the hard work I went through. I don't know. Maybe it's because I thought they would just respawn in my inventory after I lost. This is sickening to watch, so let's move on to Loretta. Before Loretta, we were able to go into Moog's Ass Palace and secure our farming location for literal shit. This will allow us to stuff it in a pot and throw it at enemies like a chimpanzee that just got the flu shot. After obtaining blood pots, we've almost obtained every piece of equipment that we'll be using for this run. This will allow us to easily access each spot when needed, and I'll let you in on a little hint. It happens a lot. There's a lot of farming because I run out of a bunch of materials. As for Loretta's stats, she has decent hemorrhoid and emptiness in my heart resistance. I could have brought in lightning pots, but I relied on bleed pots because she stands still shooting magic at me quite a bit, and because her dumpy stat is a humongous 8, which extends her hitbox. As for the fight, Loretta's resistance makes us have to use 2 pots in order to freeze her, and we try to bleed her using our shit pots. These pots do a little bit of damage, but what I'm looking for here is to get a bleed off before she loses hypothermia in order to blast her health bar off the moon. The fight is basically a replica of the start. When she warms back up, we try to bleed her again in order to just annihilate her, because being in this fight for too long opens me up to get sent to Hogwarts, because I know I'll make a mistake eventually. After bleeding her twice, our pots disappear, and so I have to rely on other damage sources, so we apply poison and begin chipping away her health. Even if I had more pots, it wouldn't have mattered because we wouldn't be able to get the second bleed off before she loses control of her horse and cries about the loss of her equestrian title. The fight ends with a cheeky knife to her horse while she ascends into heaven prematurely. Alright, let's talk about Fire Giant. So initially I beat Fire Giant without fan knives and a lower level, but because I'm distracted easily, I forgot to record it. Gosh dang it, I made such a silly mistake. After a long and grueling fight with him, I looked over and saw I never pressed record, so the fight is actually in New Game Plus. In fact, all the fights after Godskin Duo are in New Game Plus, because after beating them with no fan daggers, I got sick and tired of not having them as an extra damage option. So to recap, Fire Giant is in New Game Plus, Godskin Duo is not, and everything else after Godskin Duo is in New Game Plus. Got it? Great. So let's move on to the loadout, because we add another item to our loadout, which is the Uplifting Aromatic, which will increase our damage and our defense. However, there's a catch, because you need Artorias' leaves, which wouldn't be a problem except that there's only a limited amount in the game. Once you pick them all up, you have to go into New Game Plus to get more, so I have to make sure not to waste them unless I know I can make use of them. Fire Giant is one of those fights because he hits hard and he's super hard. His fight is pretty tough as well, so we have to be careful. His stats show that he's super strong against being frozen, probably because he's the Fire Giant, but he's still able to be frozen anyway for some reason. His dumpy stat is a pitiful 3 because during second phase it's stuck in the snow for most of the fight and gets cold. As for the fight, we start off with poison just to get his health bar moving, and we have to be careful with our pots because we can miss, just like that.
Cool. This is fucking bullshit.
And that. Okay, so I miss a couple pots here and there, but that's okay because my spirit is not broken and I continue on.
How fast I am.
Now, I don't know why I didn't try to bleed him while he was frozen, but because I waited so long, I don't actually get the bonus damage, and instead I waste most of my pots for no return. Second phase, we have low supplies, so we have to rely on some of our weaker options, but because we have these super heavy knives that inflict bleed for some reason while none of the others do, we're pretty fine. We keep our distance from this man because we want to become an Olympic medalist by javelin throwing straight into his eye for Oonga Boonga damage. Probably could have used some actual damage items like lightning pots, but I like status effects, so we move on to Foreskin Duo. The typical foreskin strat with consumables is to use sleep pots, also known as anesthesia, and focus on a 1v1. I, however, am a masochist and I refuse to use them, simply because I didn't feel like going and getting them because I would have been sleep potted in real life. As for the stats, once again, lightning is the best option, but again, I'm not going to use that because of reasons. So we bring the same stuff as always. Their dumpy stat is a 6 for the big one and a 2 for the small one for a combined total of a whopping 8. Holy moly. As for the fight, I have no idea what is happening. We start off with the poison and the usual stuff, but then my brain is disconnected from my body during the fight, and to prove it to you, look at this shit. First off, what did I think was going to happen here? Obviously, he's going to roll over the pillar, but that's not the worst thing I do. What am I doing? What am I doing here? I try to switch my hotbar items to what I want, and I just stand out in the open like a baboon. Apparently, I can't multitask because this is terrible. That gets followed up by Big Boy here spamming his power move. He had no cooldown on it and just abused the move while he could, which is disgusting. This fight is actually different from usual Godskin fights because I actually decided to fight the skinny one this time. Typically I ignore him because I'm scared of him and his weight loss journey, but this time I have to prove I'm not as bad as the beginning of the fight showed. I also do this because if I only attacked the Michelin Man, I would boost his status effect resistance so high that he would reflect it back onto me. This is a great idea because I didn't bring in any other options, so I kind of had to do this. All in all, the fight ends with running away with no health, throwing party tricks at these guys until they leave the party that I never invited them to begin with. Same stuff as always, and Dragon Lord's stats are ridiculous. Look at this. Why are they so large? He can't even count that high since he's a dragon, and his dumpy stat is a fat 0 because furry. It's so inflated for no reason other than the fact that he's a rock dragon, but he still has fillings, so that should account for something. It takes 4 whole blue pots to freeze him and about 10 red ones to bleed him. This is fine because he stands still for the most part, so we're able to get the full effect on him. Dragon Lord's fight is pretty simple since you can just stay away from him for the most part and launch items in his direction without having to worry too much. I should have poisoned him to start with, but I didn't because I blacked out for a while during the fight. Other than that, there's not much to say honestly. The fight's pretty boring and typical. There's not really any exciting stuff other than me trying to run away from this nuke, but that's about it. Let's move on to Malekith. Malekith's damage negation is absurd, as well as his 0 dumpy stat, again, furry. 40 magic, 40 fire, 40 lightning, 80 holy, god, it's just not necessary. But because I'm obsessed with putting blood shit in a pot and throwing it, I'm not too bothered. I want to freeze him right off the start because he's way too hot for his own good, but I take a beating before I'm able. Once I do it though, I sprinkle magic fairy dust all over the arena because he hates sparkles. And because of this, we throw rocks at each other at the same time, and I think my rock was much stronger. Say what you will about how this fight looks so far, because if I were to tell you I only used a couple of healing items for this whole fight, even I wouldn't believe you. Since he's so resistant to most damage, I sprinkle more powder and he sniffs that shit up. Absolutely snorts it so much that he turns into a crackhead. Now that he's a crackhead, he becomes hyperactive and is bouncing off the walls. He's just flying around the arena, so I sneak some more powder into his system in an attempt to overload him so that he passes out. I basically just wait for him to do his slammer attack so I can nick his skin and sample his blood. This allows me to know how much of the Kush powder he's inhaled and exactly how much longer he has before his high turns into a low and we can move on to Gideon. But before that, don't mind me scrolling past the item I wanted and wasting time doing so before I finish the fight. Gideon's stats are all over the place, and I don't know if it's a typo or it has something to do with his armor set, but it's whack. His dumpy stat, however, is a huge 9, because he's the closest thing to a normal human that wouldn't absolutely destroy me by size. Same loadout as usual, and Gideon starts the fight swinging, and I mean really swinging, so we siege lean peek him, and this fight turns into a clown fiesta real quick. This fight looks like 2 people playing a fighting game, and they both are just button mashing. I mean, look at this. What is happening? What is going on? How did he shoot a laser straight into the sky and then change the angle? What is even happening? Honestly, there's no strategy, there's no technique, because confession time, the truth is, I actually am button mashing this loser. And at this point, I'm convinced he is as well. I have no idea why I brought status effect pots into this fight. It's just prolonging it way more than needed, but it makes for a good laugh, I guess, so I hope you enjoy this chaos. Hoarlu is a very reasonable person and makes sure that I feel safe with his stats. Hardly any resistance, okay status resistance, and he's a pretty swell guy with an average dumpy of 5. The loadout's very simple. We replace blood pots for spark pots because he moves way too much for the flies to nibble at him long enough for any real results. I don't know what happened between this fight and Gideon because I'm actually playing like a coherent person. This is some of the best gameplay I've ever seen for myself, and honestly I'm pretty impressed with it. Of course, I don't want to toot my own horn too much, but like, if I were in an Elden Ring esports event, I wouldn't bet on myself because I already know I would win that money, baby. But aside from that, first phase is dodge, throw, jump, throw, very simple. Second phase is where things slow down because of my fear of getting grabbed by this man. There's one thing I don't quite understand though. Since his shirt is off, why doesn't his frost resistance go down? He has no protection except his absolute abs of steel. This makes no sense. Of course, this doesn't stop me from making sure to use the very last of my frost pot to make sure he has a bad day. The fight is waiting for him to slam or try to grab me in order for me to have enough time to throw my pot friends at him until eventually he barrel stuffs me and throws off my whole dodge, which in turn makes the fight drag on for way longer than needed. Of course, we can't loot Mohg's whole palace of his bloody shit without actually beating him up using it. And what better way to do it than with the bleed effects since he enjoys it so much, and it's basically the best way to actually beat him because these stats are trash. Now, Mohg's Dumpy is a -5 because of a questionable relationship with a certain someone, but this fight is so long. You see, Mohg starts off like a blind date. At first he seems like a pushover with how he slow walks towards you, throws out a little blood here and there, no biggie. Definitely not a red flag, literally, but more figuratively. This blood isn't actually his, he just keeps it stored in a magic circle in the sky, and that's all fine and dandy, because I'm putting blood in a pot, so we have a ton in common. It's almost a match made in heaven, and we're really kicking it off. In fact, we enjoy each other's company so much that he can't stay away from me. Every time I try to get a little personal space from him, he shambles over to me again, but there's a problem because after running away for long enough, he shows his true colors by growing wings out of his back. This man catfished me. There I thought he was a nice guy with maybe a little bit of an obsession with blood, but everyone has hobbies they enjoy. What I'm more offended by is the fact that he was a guinea pig for a science team, and now he has some adverse side effects. I would never allow myself to be with a lab experiment, so I promptly put an end to this little hookup by doing the only thing that will stop a monster like him. That's right, I throw knives at his face until he fucking dies. It's what he deserves because guess what? After he disposes of you, he speaks another person's name. That's right, Mikola. He was seeing someone while we were getting to know each other. That scoundrel. And to make it worse, they're related. To make a long story short, I cut that relationship off real quick because yikes. I don't need that kind of drama in my life, so let's infect a snake. Snake Dumpy, 0. Reptilian, not a fan. What I am a fan of though, is these dogshit stats. It might as well be negative, these are so bad. However, you may expect bleed pots, but kukris are just enough to deal with them, otherwise bleed pots would be overkill. The fight is very simple. Freeze pot kukris, huge payoff for virtually no problems. He slow slithers towards me, I feed him cold still, he says ouch, I repeat. I have his biggest weakness, which is status effects, and he absolutely hates it. But you know who else hates it? That's right, his mom, Rykard. Rykard has a little bit higher stats, but still a 0 Dumpy because he's a reptilian person thing face. Now, there's something that's been bothering me. Both the Serpent and Rykard have pretty low frostbite shields, even though they're on fire at all times. But Fire Giant is bigger than both of theirs combined. Why is this? What makes him so special that these snakes don't have? Why can the snakes barely touch an ice cube and scream in agony, while Fire Giant can consume a mountain of it? It must be something to do with living in the snow, but these guys live in a volcano. I don't know. Makes no sense. What does make sense is how proficient I become at running away from Armageddon. These skulls are so obnoxious. They literally just make the fight pause because if you try to attack, you get nuked. The only option is to run away from them, and I don't like that. I'm gonna tell you how much I don't like it. On a scale from 1 to I don't like it, it's like a severe to moderate plague psoriasis. But obviously Rykard gets frozen and bled a lot. He gets poisoned, I run away from the skulls, that makes him rage, and then the fight ends. Malenia's stats are pretty low, especially her red and blue ones. So our loadout here is what you expected. That's right, frost and blood pots. Just kidding, I tricked you, and you actually fell for it. It's actually lightning pots because I don't know why. I don't know why it's not fire pots, but it's lightning pots, so we're gonna roll with that. Her Dumpy stat is a pretty high 7, which is impressive. However, once second phase starts, it drops to a measly 2 because of it being eaten away by cancer. As for the fight, I use lightning pots instead of bleed pots because when the flies come out of the pots, she shoots them away with ease and avoids them all. The fight plays out in the typical way of Melania being a pushover, trying to show off her new martial arts she learned, which ends up terribly for her because we just throw a pot at her and it explodes on her face. Think of it like Link from The Legend of Zelda. You have the main villain talking about their plans and their combat abilities, and then you just throw a pot at them to get a rupee so you can buy more bombs to blow them up. This goes on until finally we get enough rupees to buy the next DLC, containing the final bosses of Radagon and Elden Beast. No bleed, no fun, not good, dumpy stat 4 because he's a ginger. Obviously you can't bleed Radagon, but you can freeze him, which is exactly what I do. Again, lightning pots instead of fire because reasons, and the fight turns into a game show. A game show of when can I attack so you don't counter with a parry. The answer to that question is never, because he has cat-like reflexes, pulls a 180 out of nowhere, deflects the things I throw at him with ease. This is bad news for me because I spent a whole 2 minutes just trying to get him poisoned after his 87 lightning attacks in a row. Eventually though, we do poison him as well as make his toes a little cold so we can actually start playing the game. Unfortunately during this run I was still a little baby gamer new man, and most of his attacks that allow for easy counters are missed because I didn't know you can actually dodge them any other way. So sorry for the cringe gameplay, but it works out in the end because of persistence, luck, and luck. So be thankful for that because I know I am. Theoretically speaking, if I had a time machine to do this over with the knowledge of the fight I have now, it probably could have been over in a couple of minutes, maybe like 2 or 3, but instead I dragged this out for almost 8. Trust me, I've gotten better since this time, I swear. I'm not super mega ultra doo-doo diaper anymore. But let's get into Elden Beast. Now, Elden Beast is a beast with his stats. See what I did there? I made a cringe joke and you didn't chuckle. But now that I'm acknowledging it, you're still not laughing. But anyways, these stats are absurd and so is his dumpy. That's right, Shamu the Whale gets a whopping 10 out of 10 on his dumpy skill. That's right, I said it. This whale is massive. And what better way to send him off than with double lightning pots, because I know he likes that electrifying Kush popsicle fresh from the freezer. As for the fight, well, there's not much to say. We go right up next to him, get blinded by a flashbang, and visit the optometrist because holy shit, my eyes are burning from everything happening. After that though, it's smooth sailing as we hunt for Duke Fishron back and forth in the ocean. That's right, it's everybody's favorite gameplay of chasing Elden Beast down, trying to get his autograph because he's so famous. However, he's not willing to give it, so we have to forcefully make him sign our helmet with our own 2 hands. There's so much yellow happening at this point, I don't know how I managed to dodge anything, but it works out in the end. Now, you may have noticed something for all these fights, and that is the fact that I never had a Great Rune. In fact, I never use Great Runes because I'm too obese and too lazy to go up those towers to activate them. That's it, no other reason, and that's about it for the fight honestly, and the run, so yeah, anyways.